Welcome back to another episode of Decoded, a Lost Codex Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, the writer, narrator, and director for the Lost Codex episodes. And today, I am alone. There is no guest host today for one very special reason. Today, we are talking about World of Warcraft Before the Storm. Now, special thanks to Blizzard and Del Rey Books for sending me an early copy of the book to review. If you haven't watched our spoiler-free version of the book and you don't want to hear any of the juicy details or story bits that happen, go check out that video now, and come back and listen to this after you've read the book. Now, for this particular episode, I'm going to break it down by storyline and characters, ramble and rant about what I absolutely loved and wanted to see more of, and save all the speculation and thoughts of the future for next week. I have a very special guest host joining me on Decoded next week, where we're going to discuss the future of Azeroth and all the things that happen in this book. But enough talk. Let's get down to the review. Now, as we know, Azerite. Azerite is the main focus of this upcoming expansion. And as such, Christy Golden did a great job of describing how important it really is. We saw in the cinematic Anduin and Sylvanas both reacting, but we didn't know exactly what that reaction was or what they were feeling. I said in my spoiler-free review that those two cinematics happen in the book in great detail, and we get a personal perspective of what happens to Anduin, what happens to Sylvanas. Now, for Anduin, when he gets the piece of Azerite from Matthias Shaw, he's been going through a lot. Legion was exhausting, the entire campaign. He lost his father. There's a lot going on for the new King of Stormwind. And the second the Azerite dropped into his palm, all that grief, all that exhaustion was just swept away from him instantly. Wariness fled, and it was replaced by this surging, almost crackling energy. Insight raced into his mind. Strategies popped up into his mind, each of them successful. He felt physically stronger and physically more able-bodied than ever before. He felt that not only he could climb mountains, but he could move them. He could end wars and channel the light into every dark corner of the world. Not even the light affected him in the same way Azerite did. It was similar, but not the same. The light affects you spiritually. Azerite was a physical effect. Now, Sylvanas, very different character, very different motives, very different internal dialogue going on. For her, that strength aspect came back, but it was energy coiled inside each muscle, straining like a beast of pure precision and power against a leash. Thoughts that were frighteningly brilliant. Keep in mind, frighteningly brilliant for her. Sylvanas, who is clever and scary clever on her own, the thoughts that entered her mind were innovative and creative as they rushed through her head. She was no longer a queen or even a dark lady. She was a goddess of destruction and creation. Very different, but very similar effects on both of them. And instant, and Gallywix, when he shows Sylvanas the top of his staff. But by the way, I found it interesting. Gallywix was the first to discover Azerite years ago. The Azerite that's on top of Gallywix's staff is not a recent addition. Apparently, Gallywix found a little bit of Azerite back in Kazan years ago, and when they hit this vein, Azerite bubbled out in gold form, hardened, and then either he put it onto his staff and then it turned red, or it turned red. Ultimately, it turned from its brilliant gold color to this red color. And so this whole time, in every single artwork and cinematic we've seen Gallywix with a red staff, that's Azerite. Azerite has been in front of us this whole time, and for some reason it only recently turned back to gold. So I found that to be interesting. What triggered the head of his staff to suddenly turn from its dull red color to the brilliant gold that he had first, the reason he had shaped it into the head of his staff was because it was gold that wasn't gold. Sylvanas says it reminds her of amber, and it's been in front of us this whole time, but evidently it hasn't had that effect on Gallywix, or maybe it has, but you can assume if the color faded, maybe the effect faded. But why is that flaring up now? So the Azerite that Sylvanas touches is actually Azerite from quite a few years ago, compared to Anduin's Azerite, which is brand new. Both realize how crucial this is, and both set out to learn more. Goblin's already in Silithus. Galawick says, don't worry, my people are on it, but the Alliance needs to mobilize. So this is the main plot line of the book, up until a certain point, but this also sets up Battle for Azeroth. This explains to you, the player, why Azerite is so important. And I think this Azerite plotline is to set up the prelude to Battle for Azeroth, the Teldrassil and Lordaeron, because I'll say right off the bat, those questions don't get answered in this book. The burning of Teldrassil, Siege of Lordaeron, that isn't even part of the book in any way. Everything that happens in the book happens way before that, but the Azerite plotline is key. So that's your trickle, that's your introduction to that. We're going to come back to the Azerite in just a second. But as I said, it's the main plotline up until a certain point. And I think that this introduction is what sets up several storylines throughout the book. So, as a result, this sets Anduin up on a journey, and he's going to go visit some Alliance cities. Anduin has already been planning to visit the allies of, the different members and capital cities of the Alliance, to thank them for their role in the war against the Legion, to mourn with them, to show that he as a king cares. And the first place he's going is Ironforge. Now, let's go back to Sylvanas for a second. Beginning of the story, as we saw with the BlizzCon preview, Sylvanas is in Orgrimmar, and there's a celebration. It's a march around Orgrimmar. It's not a parade. Garrosh threw a parade when he came back from Northrend, and she did not want to remind anyone of Garrosh, so she made sure that no one used the word parade. It's just a march. During this march, Nathanos reveals to her that in her absence in Undercity, her people have noticed. They've noticed she's been missing. They miss their queen, and holes in power tend to be filled. Sylvanas is instantly reminded of the coup led by Putris and Varimathras. Nathanos reveals that it is not a coup, but there is a council of governing individuals who call themselves the Desolate Council. And this council tends to the Forsaken needs. It's a governing body that attends to the needs of the Forsaken people. Her actions in Stormheim, as we saw in the Stormheim cinematic, where she attempts to subjugate the Valkyr Air, so that she can get an unlimited amount of Valkyr to serve her. Well, news of that gets back to the Forsaken, and not all of them are happy. And Sylvanas is bewildered. Why wouldn't they be happy? The Valkyr, the more Valkyr she has, the more Forsaken she can create, and the more Forsaken she can re-resurrect when they die in the battlefield. So, she's trying to save them. Why wouldn't they be happy? And Nathanos says, well, they don't want to be saved, and such is the power of free will, the free will she gave them when she freed them from the Lich King, so they're free to disagree. She's very skeptical about the council, and she actually thinks she could organize a march into the Undercity, get every member of the Horde except Forsaken to follow her into Undercity, round up this council, and destroy them for treason, even though they haven't done anything treasonous yet, but she decides that's a bit extreme. She would much rather dissuade Forsaken rather than destroy them. So she's going to hear them out eventually. Back to Anduin. Anduin decides to head to Ironforge, and he meets with Moira. We get a little introduction to Moira's son, little Dagran, which I thought was cute. Dagran is described as a 6, maybe 7-year-old little dwarf boy with a little hint of an accent, warm gray skin, green eyes, and white hair. Which I really hope to see him in game, because that is a one hell of a description. He got, traits from both mom and dad, gray skin from dad, green eyes from Moira, and white hair. That kid's gonna be a charmer when he becomes of age. That is the future king of both Shadowforge City and Ironforge City. During the visit, Moira and Anduin and Dagran are walking around, and Grandpa Magni shows up, unannounced. Little Dagran is sent away, and Magni's talking with Velen and a bunch of other characters. Magni and Moira and Anduin show up, and this is the first time Anduin's seen Magni since his petrification in the Shattering. He hasn't seen him or met with him since, so it's kind of a little reunion. It's a nice reunion between the two characters. Magni's role here sets up both the storyline for the rest of the book and a certain storyline for Battle for Azeroth. As we know, we get the necklace coming in Battle for Azeroth, and there's a whole reputation called Champions of Azeroth that is led by Magni, where you work together to find Azeroth and save Azeroth when you're not killing members of the opposite faction. Magni says Azeroth is hurt and she's dying and she needs healing, and that's why he's come to Velen, Moira, and Anduin. They're priests. They know about healing, and something needs to be done. Moira and Velen decide that it's time that Anduin visits the class hall. He didn't get any artifact weapons, but you know what? Let's visit the class hall. No one's there anymore. So they bring Anduin to Netherlight Temple. So anyone who plays a priest, you guys get this is a priest book, by the way. I'm going to just say this is an entire priest book. Hold on to your horses, because here we go. So they get to Netherlight Temple, and for those who don't know, Netherlight Temple is a Draenei temple in the middle of the Twisting Nether. So Anduin literally leaves the planet to go to this Draenei temple out in the middle of space, middle of the Twisting Nether. This was once a temple that housed a void Naru, a Naru who had fallen into a void state, and they were studying it, but it had been in this confined in this terrible state. Beginning of Legion, priests from all around the world, including the champion/player character, heal the Void Naru back into its original form, and that becomes their little clubhouse for priests. Anduin's amazed at what he sees, because he doesn't just see the Alliance races that worship the light, like Worgen, humans, dwarves, gnomes, and Draenei. He sees Night Elves worshipping their moon goddess here. That's allowed. He sees Tauren worshipping their sun god. And he sees Forsaken. And he's breathless. He is caught so unaware. He knew about the unity of the class halls in Legion, obviously, to a degree, but he didn't see it. He had never experienced it. And so to him, seeing members of both factions in the same room getting along, he sees a Forsaken woman laughing with, I think it's a dwarf and a Worgen, and they're just laughing, they're just talking. And he is so caught off guard. And Christy Golden really painted how much Anduin really wants this peace between the Alliance and Horde to work, because he gets so, excited is not even the right word, he gets so elevated that this is possible. He hears someone say something, "We are priests before all else," and he turns to see who says it, thinking it's a human priest of the light. And he's face to face with a Forsaken. Now, even though Anduin is, relatively calm and open-minded, he's face to face with an undead, and he doesn't react visibly, but I think it says inside he's reeling. He's really like, whoa, this is kind of close. And they introduce the Forsaken as none other than Archbishop Alonza's Fowl, and Anduin fanboys right away. He's mind blown, and I thought this was one of my favorite minor parts of Legion is when, for anyone who doesn't know, Alonza's Fowl is the reason human paladins exist. He's the founder of the Knights of the Silver Hand, the original 5 paladins: Uther the Lightbringer, Turalyon, Tyrion Fordring, Saidan Dathrohan, and Gavinrad the Dire. These are the first 5 paladins. Alonza's Fowl is the one who founded this order long ago. Now, at some point in time in lore, he just died. He perished, and there was no mention of him becoming a Forsaken. Suddenly in Legion, turns out he was a Forsaken. He did get resurrected with the Scourge. He did retain his free will later on with the Forsaken, and he's been in secret ever since. So Anduin fanboys completely, says, you were, and then he corrects himself, you are one of my heroes. And Alonza's Fowl is not your typical Forsaken. First of all, very sarcastic. And he says, I don't look like my portrait. I've lost a lot of weight, obviously, because I'm dead. And I've lost my beard. My beard was my look. And it mentions it both in this book and in Arthas Rise of the Lich King. Alonza's Fowl was a short, stout man with a long, great big fluffy white beard, kind of like Great Father Winter. And quick to laugh, but very stoic, very strong. And just a genuinely good guy, and he's maintained that personality in Undeath. He's very sarcastic, very quick and sharp, and Anduin's like, oh my god, this is huge. Alonso's Fowl decides to do a double whammy on Anduin and introduces him to another face of history, and behind him stands Kalia Menethil, Arthas' sister, Taranis Menethil's daughter. The whole world thought Alonso's Fowl and Kalia were lost forever. They were gone. Arthas marched into Lordaeron and killed everyone, and these important names just were assumed dead. Either dead, undead, or that's it. No Forsaken stepped forward ever saying they were Alonso's Fowl or Kalia Menethil, so they were just thought lost to the past. And suddenly these two characters step forward. Kalia Menethil is also a priest, as is Alonso's Fowl, obviously. They have this conversation, and Anduin's natural leadership kind of takes over, and he addresses the whole crowd. He says, all of you, Horde and Alliance, need to reach out to the other healers of your faction, druids, shamans, anyone else, and we need to unite to save Azeroth. And he kind of apologizes to Fowl for taking over, but Fowl's like, no, go for it, man. Do what you gotta do. And Anduin's like, you know what? We're united here. We're gonna save Azeroth. Let's do a little bit of a backtrack. Let's go back to Sylvanas. Now, Sylvanas is also doing a little bit of a tour. She's in Thunderbluff, and she is bored out of her mind. She's attending a memorial service in Thunderbluff. The Tauren are mourning the tragedy of Silithus and the Sword. And the reason is, aside from it being a giant scary desert with a lot of bugs and cultists, there was the Cenarian outposts, and there was quite a few druids there, including Tauren. And so, to the Tauren of Thunderbluff, this is a tragedy, a horrible loss of life. And Sylvanas flat out says to herself, it's not a tragedy, it's a gift. Azerite was born from this tragedy. She doesn't care. She's just sitting there. She's sitting on the ground. Nathanos is uncomfortably sitting on the ground as well. She says, if I can't stand, you can't stand. And she's got a Blood Elf mage there to port her around. I found it interesting. A Blood Elf mage, not a Forsaken mage. And I think that was to show that the Blood Elves truly are the masters of magic on the Horde side. Now they're competing with the Nightborn, but that's another story. During this little meeting, one of Bane's personal scouts comes running up and says that they have an unannounced guest. And it turns out that it's Magni Bronzebeard. Now, Magni Bronzebeard has showed up in Thunderbluff, and Sylvanas is like, oh crap, I know why you're here. She says this all to herself. Magni is the speaker for Azeroth, and the only reason he's here is to stop anything to do with Azerite and to heal this wound. And Sylvanas knows this wound is yielding Azerite, and she is not okay with Magni showing up. But not everyone knows about Azerite. So she says a bit of a bold statement. She says out loud, I know that Magni Bronzebeard is no longer truly a dwarf, but he once was. And I know that you, High Chieftain, she's talking to Bane, the thought of formally hosting a former leader of an Alliance race must be awkward, if not outright repellent. I will relieve you of the decision whether to welcome him. I am the Warchief of the Horde. Anything he has to say, he can say to me alone. She doesn't want his words to reach the crowd. Bane shoots back. Bane is the ultimate dropper of microphones, and Bane shoots back, I would think that you of all people would understand how a physical transformation can change one's view, Warchief. You were once a member of the Alliance. Now you lead the Horde. Magni is no longer even flesh. Sylvanas has to concede to that. She's like, damn it, God. All right, fine. And she says, all right, bring him in. And the funny thing is, Magni actually can't get up to Thunderbluff because the lifts can't carry him. And I actually thought, we think of Magni being this, just this speaker for Azeroth. How heavy is Magni? He is, first of all, dwarves are heavy to start with. He is made of solid diamond. The dude is literally unmovable unless he chooses to be movable. So these massive lifts that can lift several Tauren at a time can't lift Magni. So she sends down her mage, and her mage teleports Magni up. I thought that was a funny little moment to show, a little bit of realism there. Magni shows up and right away talks back to Sylvanas, points a finger in her direction and says, your little green men are making bad things worse, poking and prodding, and Azeroth doesn't like it. She needs to heal or she's gonna die. Sylvanas, retorts saying, no, they're investigating. And he goes, no, they're not. And it's one of the only times someone gets to speak back to Sylvanas, and she can't do anything. And I thought about it, like, what if she just snapped and she sent her Dark Rangers on him? No one could do anything. He's made of diamond. The Tauren couldn't even move him. He's unmovable. And so I thought that was kind of cool. And she knows that she can do nothing. So she says, I assume you've already spoken to the Alliance. And he says, already done. She tells Bane that the Horde is going to organize. Dialogue happens and Magni leaves. This is where things get interesting. We get some interesting dialogue between Sylvanas and Tauren. Now, keep in mind, Tauren are the whole reason that Forsaken are in the Horde. Hamul Rune Totem, who is present in this meeting, convinces the Horde to allow the Forsaken in, thinking they can be redeemed for their atrocities. They're not all bad. That was Hamul's argument long ago. Hamul's the first one to speak when Magni leaves. He suggests that they get to work immediately, and all those who worked with the Alliance are to... And he gets interrupted. And Sylvanas says, no, we're not going to get to work immediately. Bane looks at her and says, you do remember the cataclysm, right? Such a thing cannot be permitted to happen a second time. To which she says, Bane, we're going for a walk. Come with me. And on this walk, privately between the two of them, she brings up his friendship with Anduin and the continued communication. She knows about it. Bane doesn't deny it. Bane says, what are you going to do? Not like as a taunt, just says, like, are you going to punish me? And she says, no, but only if it stops here. You are no longer permitted to talk to Anduin. Stop your DMs. You're done. And she words it as, this is going to be I hope this opens up a whole new future for the Forsaken and the Tauren. So right away, Sylvanas is severing Bane's ties to Anduin, who's no longer just the son of the King of the Alliance. He is the King of the Alliance. He is one of the heads of the opposite faction. So Sylvanas puts her foot down and says no. They return, and when asked if she's going to remove the goblins from the area, she says no, they're investigating. But when they learn more, she's going to share all of that with the Horde. And Hamul says, but you're not going to share with the Alliance. She says, Magni has already spoken to the Alliance. I am quite certain Anduin will not be sending couriers to Orgrimmar with their latest discoveries. Why should I? To which Hamul says, because this world belongs to all of us. Sylvanas smiled. Perhaps one day, soon, all of us will mean Horde. In the meantime, I put the interests and welfare of my people before the Alliance, who destroyed Tarajo. I suggest all of you do as well. Hamul tries to interject, and Sylvanas turns to him and says, object again, and I will not take it well. Vol'jin and Isloa named me the War Chief of the Horde, and as War Chief of the Horde, I decide what is important to reveal, when and to whom. Is that understood? Hamul backs down. So, and I'm going to talk about this next week. Sylvanas brings up the Tarajo card. The one, I shouldn't say the one. In comparison to Horde attacking Alliance settlements and Alliance attacking Horde settlements that are considered morally gray, as the new word of the month is, Tarajo is one of the instances where the Alliance destroyed a Tauren outpost. The Tauren, the friendliest race of the Horde. And she pulls that up. Miss Queen Destroyer of countries, launcher of plague, and butcher of South Shore and all of that. I found it to be interesting, and it's just... this is why I love Sylvanas, because she's just she knows what to say, and the whole crowd shuts up. She's very, no one talks back to Sylvanas, except Magni. Magni's the only one who can talk back to Sylvanas. So, that's interesting, setting up some questionable loyalties between the Forsaken and the Horde. Now, I'm going to stop the plot analysis here for a second, and we're going to talk about some minor characters. Because as I mentioned in the spoiler-free review, there's a lot of minor characters in the story that just make everything so much better. It makes the world seem alive, and they all have a purpose. And in true Christie Golden fashion, all of these characters you feel and you connect with. And there's quite a few of them. We'll start with Will Benton. Will Benton, anyone who's read Christie Golden books will recognize that name. He's from The Shattering, and he's Anduin's personal servant. And not only servant to Anduin, but he also served Varian when he was growing up, and also Lane Rin. It's implied he's been with the family forever. Long time. He's been around a long time. And if you think about it, think how much he's been through. He's been through the sacking of Stormwind the first time by the orcs. He's been through the entire Second War, wasn't on the front lines. Rebuilding of Stormwind, Varian's abduction, the Burning Crusade, the Lich King's campaign, the Cataclysm, the Legion, all of that he's been through serving House Rin. And even though Anduin's a capable Otto, you think Anduin's this noble soul, this very well spoken. He doesn't seem the type to have a servant, even though he is royalty. He's not a commanding, do this, do that kind of guy. He keeps Will busy. Will likes to be kept busy with just little tasks that, even though Anduin doesn't need them, Anduin appreciates them. And it's Anduin's closest friend. He taught Anduin how to read and write when he was a kid. Taught Varian how to read and write. So he's been there. He's basically like Anduin's maester, if you're familiar with Game of Thrones. Mentions that he was married, but his wife was in Lordaeron and she died. And you don't get a lot of history on Will because he doesn't tell Anduin a lot of his history. Anduin doesn't even know a lot about him, except that he's just been around forever. Now let's go to Old Emma. Anyone who's played Alliance and run around Stormwind will know there's a lady named Old Emma. And she makes little quips and comments about dragging around the water buckets filled with water, going back to and from the well in Stormwind. And she's, this old tough bird walking around. And there's some quests way earlier in the game, years ago, where you find out that her family was all in Lordaeron and all of them died. Her sister Janice and Janice's husband John were... Janice was a ghost. John was turned into a ghoul. Her brother Jeremiah is part of the Forsaken and he's an Undercity. But now we find out, that's just not enough to have that her sister, brother-in-law, and her brother are dead. Turns out her 3 sons also fell to the Scourge. Jem, Jack, and Jake. All 3 of them were given the honor of being guards as Terrence Menethil's honor guards, and all of them fell when Arthas sacked the city. And she constantly thinks, are they dead? Are they mindless undead? Or are they forsaken? And either way, she can do nothing about it. And so she determines to stay focused on her everyday activities, help the living, not the dead. Or in this case, the undead. Let's go to some undead characters. We are introduced to Parkwal Fintalis. Now, this is the name of a character who's actually in the game. And he's a historian, or he was a historian in Lordaeron. He lived with his wife Mina and his daughter Philia. And he remembers his family fondly. Anyone who played Vanilla Forsaken, or Horde in general in Vanilla, might remember this quest chain called the Test of Lore. And this Forsaken and Undercity would send you to get these different books from all around, and you were given a blue choice of weapons at the end of the quest. And there was a lot of back and forth, the typical Vanilla experience of running across the continent to get a book and hand it back in. We get a lot of insight into Parkwal's character, and even during the vanilla quest line, you got this sort of not evil perspective from him. He was one of those Forsaken who was genuine. He was well spoken. He was not miserable and full of hate. He was a rather positive Forsaken, and that's even shown in game. We get this perspective in game as well, and we learned a little bit about his character. So he was a historian in life, as I mentioned. And several times in his undeath, he's actually snuck back to his house to try and bring some books into the Undercity. And one time, he was caught. Those books were taken, and he was scolded. And they basically said, whoever they is, the guards, whoever, had to have been guards. I don't think the abominations would have cared about books. And they said, there is no need to remember the human history of this place, only the history of the Undercity. So, Forsaken are they're told to change their name when they die. Many Forsaken, change their name. Not all of them, but many do, to abandon their former lives. They are told not to remember their former life. Do not remember the human history of this place. And they're actually told not to visit old places where they went when they were alive. That's actually heavily, not forbidden, but it implies that it's a warning. Don't do it. And oftentimes he thinks, what happens to his daughter? His daughter happened to be visiting Stormwind when the city was sacked, so is she alive? Is she not alive? And he assumes his wife is either dead or a mindless undead. And he hopes that one day he can reunite with his daughter, but that'll never happen, because if she is alive, she's Alliance, and he's Forsaken. He talks about a character who I'm gonna introduce next, called Velacinda. And Velacinda, he introduces a character, or talks about a character named Velacinda, who founded the Desolate Council that I mentioned earlier. Velacinda founded the Desolate Council out of necessity at first, because Sylvanas was gone, but a strong bond soon formed between the council members. Parkwell states that it had given him a sense of camaraderie and the knowledge that not every Forsaken was content simply to serve without questioning. The Forsaken might not be living, but they had needs, desires, emotions that were not being met. And again, this is a very unique, interesting character, because when we're introduced to Forsaken in general in-game, Silver Pine Forest is one of the funnest zones to play through, but at the end of the day, it's just rampant murder. You're just running around killing everything and launching the plague. You murder hundreds of Worgen, and not that I'm saying you shouldn't have, because it was a war. Going into Southshore, Southshore is blighted. The human fields have human bodies in the ground, which is already questionable to begin with. The Forsaken are never viewed as like the Tauren, where they're peaceful. Everything is about launch the plague, kill the living. As Putris once said, death to the scourge and death to the living. So we get this very different character perspective through Parkwell. Now let's talk about Velacinda. Velacinda mentions that she had been a servant in life, and she served those in undeath early on. She helped those who were newly awakened Forsaken, who awoke either as confused or addled. She helped soothe them. She helped guide them through that terrifying process. And I can imagine that's... We're going to talk about this next week. It's probably a very terrifying experience to suddenly reawaken. You're confused. You're addled. You've got body parts missing. You don't know who or where or what you are. And she was there to help them through that. So again, a different kind of Forsaken. And she actually helped bury those who refused Sylvanas' gift, who refused a second chance. They were put down, and she helped bury them. She had been visiting family in Lordaeron during Arthas' attack, and her husband had been living in Stormwind. She died. That's it. She became prime governor of the Desolate Council, and her and these other Forsaken, including Parkwell, agreed that some Forsaken might not want that third or fourth chance at life. It goes to imply Sylvanas resurrects dead Forsaken if they die on the battlefield. They just want the final death. They should have that option. And you really get the feel that this Desolate Council cares for the Forsaken. You're first introduced to them as this threat. Sylvanas sees them as a threat, but then you start to realize that no, they actually care about the Forsaken, and they have emotions and desires and wants that are being, muffled down by the powers that be. Don't go to the places you once loved and visited. Don't go to the, change your name. Don't think of the past. You're dead now. Don't do anything else. And it's kind of like, man, they're suffering enough. This is rough. Now let's get back to the plot line. So, Anduin visits Ironforge, visits Teldrassil, talks briefly to Malfurion and Tyrande, talking about, how they're going to send sentinels down to Silithus and everything. And he makes his way back to Stormwind, and he gets word that there's a problem going on in the keep. And he gets to the keep, and Will Benton's lying in bed. And Will Benton's on his deathbed. And it's probably one of the saddest scenes in the book, because Anduin goes, and Will says, I didn't want them to bother you. I didn't want them to disturb you. I just want, I'm sorry to pull you away from your duties. And Anduin says, no, I can heal you, whatever's going on. And it doesn't say what's going on. He's just at the end of his life. So his liver's failing or his heart's failing. And Anduin says, I can heal you. This is good. We're good. And Will says, no, this is it. I'm ready to go. And Anduin says, no, you're not ready to go. I need you. You've been around my whole life. I just started being a king. I can't do this without you. And he says, you're going to be a king for the history books, Anduin Wrynn. You're going to be, I have served the Wrynn line for so long, and you're going to be a great king, but you don't need me. And Anduin is struggling. He's like, no, let me save you. And Will's like, you know what? I'm ready to go. And Anduin slowly comes to terms with that, and he at least asks Will if he can ease his pain, so all of Will's ragged breath and suffering fades. Anduin heals that part of him. He's letting him go without pain. And he reads to him. He reads to him, and there's a little quip that he taught Anduin how to read, and Anduin used to get frustrated as a kid when he corrected his pronunciation and his spelling. And so you've got now Anduin reading and attending to the needs of his old mentor, his oldest friend. And very much how you see in both a lot of writing and also in real life, people say that in your final moments you see your loved ones before you. And he does. He calls out, and he sees, he says to Anduin early on, he goes, I've got so many people waiting for me. I've got my wife waiting for me. I've got, your grandparents are waiting for me. Your father's waiting for me. My family's waiting for me. This guy's old. There's a lot of people waiting for him. And so in his final moments, he sees his mother and his father before him, and he calls out. And then he says, Elsie, where are you? Elsie's his wife. And I don't see you, Elsie. Where are you? And Anduin's there, and he goes, I'm here. And Will says, one of his final words is, tell my wife that I always loved her, and I'll be waiting for her. And Anduin says, I will. Go on now. And he's holding Will's hand, and Will passes away peacefully. And this stirs something in Anduin. He's curious, why did Will not see Elsie? So he writes 2 letters, and it's a chance. He takes a chance, but it pays off. Writes 2 letters, and he gets Alonza's Fowl, to deliver them to Undercity. The first one goes to Will Benton's wife, Elsie, who no longer goes by Elsie. She goes by Velacinda. Will Benton's wife is the leader of the Desolate Council. She gets this letter. Fowl warns her there's some bad news in it, and Anduin tells her that her husband had passed away. He had never remarried. He had always loved her, and in his final moments, he said he'd be waiting for her. And Elsie actually kept the ring that, their wedding ring. She no longer wears it because it doesn't fit on her bony finger anymore, but she keeps it in her possession at all times. And she's just so sad but so happy that Anduin Wrynn, the leader of the king of Stormwind, writes to a citizen of Undercity. Now, when Fowl shows up, he comes strolling up. Velacinda and Nathanos are having a conversation. And he says, hey, yo, what up? I'm Alonza's Fowl. And even Nathanos is like, oh, shit. Nathanos bows. He goes, like, what do I owe the honor? And he goes, I got 2 letters, one for you and one for you. And he gives a letter to Nathanos, and he says, deliver this to your queen. And in the letter to Elsie, Anduin says that he wishes that Will could have met with his wife before he passed, but maybe they can make that happen for others. And so Nathanos delivers this letter to Sylvanas. And this letter was actually put out by Blizzard. It was they put it out as like one of the sneak previews, and it starts with I'll summarize the letter. I will cut directly to the heart of the matter. When you approach the Alliance seeking a home for your people, you will refuse. This is in reference to when the Forsaken first regained their free will. They sought out the Alliance. They sent emissaries, as stated in Chronicle 3, but those emissaries were cut down. And not to defend the Alliance, but you can assume every instance of undeath that they had dealt with had been horrible and negative. So when these undead emissaries come forward, they're gonna shit their pants and kill and ask questions later. So that's why the Forsaken were pushed away from the Alliance, because their emissaries were presumably killed. We were still reeling in terror from what Arthas had done to Lordaeron, and couldn't understand that your Forsaken were truly different. I have spoken recently with a Forsaken who is greatly respected in life, and have learned that despite all he has endured, he still follows the light. His name is Alonza's Fowl, and he was once Archbishop of Lordaeron. This missive is about families that were torn apart not by Horde and Alliance, but by Arthas, who rain despair and devastation upon all of us. I propose what amounts to a single day of ceasefire. On this day, those families who have been divided by war and death will have a chance to meet with the ones they lost. Participation will be strictly voluntary. All those on the Alliance side will be thoroughly vetted, and no one who I believe would be a danger to the Forsaken will be allowed. I would ask the same of you. We will determine a limited number of participants. A site suitable for this event is the Arathi Highlands. I will have my people assemble at the ancient fortress of Stromgard Keep. Thoradin's wall is close to a Horde outpost. There, in the open field with sufficient protection as agreed upon by two of us as leaders of Human and Forsaken, these ruptured families will meet. It will last from dawn until dusk. With your agreement, Archbishop Fowl and other priests will facilitate, assist, and offer comfort as needed. Should any harm befall to my people, be certain I will not hesitate to retaliate in kind. I also understand that should my people harm any Forsaken, you will do likewise. As priest, as King of Stormwind, and as son of Varian Wrynn, I will guarantee safe passage to the Forsaken who choose to be involved. If this ceasefire is successful, it could be repeated. Do not mistake this for an offer of peace. It is only an offer of a single day's compassion for the people who were cruelly torn apart by a force that was neither the Horde nor the Alliance. You and I have both lost family, War Chief. Let us not force that upon others who, like us, did not choose it. Done this day by my hand, King Anduin Lane Wrynn. Holy crap, I love Anduin. Anduin Wrynn, and a lot of people hate Anduin Wrynn because they see him, he's a big crybaby, he's a big peace lover. This is Warcraft, we're supposed to be killing each other. But in a world where you can't blame the humans for hating the orcs, aliens from another planet invaded, sacked the city, killed hundreds of thousands of innocent lives. You can't blame the Alliance. You can't blame the Horde for their hatred towards the Alliance. Both sides in this world have done so many things to one another. It is a world of war. And despite all of that, Anduin tries so hard. Early on, he tries for these peace summits at Theramore with Jaina, Garrosh, Thrall, Varian. He tries, and obviously it doesn't turn out well. And here he is again. In light of what happened on the Broken Shore, the Horde turned and ran. Varian died. We know what happened. We saw both sides. The Horde didn't just cowardly run. Vol'jin ordered the retreat. But to the Alliance's perspective, that didn't happen. So Anduin, Anduin doesn't know what happened. Bane, and by the way, this comes up, Bane does tell him, probably in a private message before Sylvanas cuts it all off, that it wasn't just an abandonment. It's not as it seems. So Anduin's conflicted. Was his father betrayed? Or did the Horde have a reason for fleeing? And that question weighs on Anduin every single day. And despite that, he still sends this letter, which just shows how different Anduin Wrynn really is in this world. Sylvanas is unsure of the letter. She thinks it's a trap. She's right away, she hates it. Nathanos convinces her. He says, by allowing this meeting to happen, she holds the power to their happiness in her hand. If this meeting goes well and they want it to repeat again, she's the only one that can allow that to happen. Holding it with good, reward for good behavior over their heads kind of thing. And if she allows it to happen, it shows she's listening to the council and her people. If the Forsaken go to this meeting and they end up hating the Alliance even more, their devotion to her warpath increases. Either way, Sylvanas wins. They either love it and they want more, so they're more obedient to Sylvanas, but there's that question of, will they be okay with her warpath? Or, and she holds the key to that, she can bring all of that down, or they end up hating the Alliance more, and she just gets more support. She wins, so she agrees. She says, she goes to the Desolate Council, shows up for the first time in a long time, and she says, I'm going to allow this to happen. And they are so excited. She says, each member of the Desolate Council is broken down like this. We've got the Governor Prime, which is Valcinda. You've got the 4 other governors, which makes 5. Below them are the ministers. There's 7 of these ministers, so we're at 12. And below those are 10 listeners. The listeners are those who would go out and speak and meet with the Forsaken if they had any questions, comments, or complaints. bring it back to the ministers who implement the policies the governors create. So there's a whole hierarchy, 22 members in total. Sylvana shows up and she lets the meeting happen. She says, you know what? This is going to happen. But there's conditions. She says that only members of the Desolate Council are going to be allowed to show up to this. This is the first time it's happening, so she's going to limit this. She wants to control the situation. So only members of the Desolate Council, no one else. Each of the members is allowed to write 5 names of living friends or family that will be sent to Anduin. The reason 5 is, if they write one name, what are the chances that one person is still alive or wants to meet? At least if they each give 5 names, there's 5 different options for them to choose from. As I said earlier, the meeting is in Strom, takes place between Thoradin's Wall and Stromgarde Keep in the field in the middle. Sylvana says that there's going to be archers on Thoradin's Wall ready to protect her Forsaken. Forsaken priests will be flying through the air. She presumes Alliance priests will also be in the air, while Alonza's Fowl and his neutral priests will be on the ground on the field, mediating this whole meeting. If anything happens, she's going to fly a Forsaken flag, not a Horde flag, a Forsaken flag on the wall. A Stormwind flag will fly over Stromgarde. Horns will sound, and both sides immediately retreat. So there's a whole structure to this. Anything happens that she thinks looks hostile on the field, whether it's not, whether it's the slightest thing, they're going to call a retreat, because this is very tense moments. And so Anduin and Sylvanas kind of create this very heavy set rules that we'll come back to later. Now, before we get back to that plot line, there's a certain side storyline that I've been avoiding that we're going to cover in one go here. And this is concerning the Azeroth plotline. Early on, we are introduced to a character named Saffronetta Flivers, a gnomish engineer, and she's stationed in Silithus with the Explorers League and some Night Elf Sentinels to investigate Azerite. Pretty interesting character, and we kind of get to meet her team and stuff early on. We also meet a goblin who lives retired in Tenaris, named Grizzak Fizzwrench. Grizzak is visited by Gallywix and coaxed, blackmailed into making Azerite weapons. Grizzak requires a lab partner, and Gallywix says he'll get anyone he needs, he just has to name them. Grizzak names Saffronetta the gnome, who happens to be his ex-wife. Now, Saffronetta, or as she's referred to as Safi in the book, is abducted by Gallywix's goons and brought from Silithus to Tenaris. Grizzak is genuinely happy to see her. She's not. She's just been kidnapped. She's pissed. And dragged into this mess that she doesn't want to be in, working for one of the leaders of the Horde. They agree to experiment on Azerite, and there's a lot of chapters where we actually get to see Azerite's physical properties, which is really cool. I'll let you guys kind of explore that on your own. But as they're experimenting, as they're working, they bicker and argue like an old couple, and they talk about why they broke up. And they were once engineering partners once upon a time, and they fell in love, but that all kind of crumbled, and they got divorced. Working together, this reuniting in their laboratory reunites that love, and they actually fall back in love. And we kind of see this interracial couple of goblin and gnome, which, most interracial couples in Azeroth are high elves and humans, or mostly that. So it was neat to see like something a little bit different. Gallywix isn't pleased with their process. They're making amazing process, a lot of cool discoveries, but they're not making weapons, and Gallywix wants weapons. They don't want to make weapons, and they know that Azerite is awful and amazing at the same time, and they don't want to contribute to this war. So they try to escape. Gallywix's goons interfere and threaten to take the research. I think Safi mentioned something about sabotaging the research, and the goons leave them bound, strapped together next to a bomb. Safi and Grizzak try to escape, and early on Grizzak had proposed to Safi, and they're going to get remarried with a ring made of Azerite, and they're trying to hop away. They're both kind of tied together, but they're hopping away from the bomb in Tenaris. And there's a part where Safi acknowledges her ring and says that it's made of Azerite, and it might just be enough to save them from the bomb. It doesn't say how, but it's just enough to save them from the bomb. Not a lot of clarification on that, so it's kind of like we don't really know what that part meant, and I'd have to go back and really read it in depth, but this part of the story is suddenly cut off right as Grizek goes to say I love you to Safi. The bomb goes off. And this is the spoiler podcast. That's the last we see of them in the book. Now, I understand that, Christy, if you're listening to this, I understand that, you like to play with our emotions. You like, we're all still recovering from Kindy. I'm not really sad about, I am sad about this, but are they dead? I don't know if I should write them off or not, because Safi and Grizek both say that they're, they think they're far enough away from the bomb, and then the last chapter says the bomb exploded, and we don't see them again. There's no mention of them dying, there's no mention of their bodies found, nothing. I searched on the beta for NPCs with their names, nothing. So, they're just gone? That storyline's just gone? Christy, we need to have a talk. I was distraught when Kindy died, but here I'm confused. I need closure. I need answers. Why would you do this? I'll admit, I'm a huge gnome lover, and I think goblins are one of the funnest races to read because I put their voices in my head. But with all this Kalia and Alonzo's Fall and Anduin and Sylvanas plotline going on, I will admit early on, Safi's story and Grizek's story was kind of like, I don't want to say filler chapters, but to me, I wanted to get back to the Kalia stuff. And as the book went on, I was like, you know what? I actually like this storyline. Them falling back in love, defying Gallywix. This is kind of cool. This is like a little hero story on the side. And then suddenly, boom, gone. So I don't know what to say on this. As far as I can tell, they both die. The bomb explodes and they die. Maybe there's a short story planned for them. Maybe there's a story planned and it turns out they're going to be alive. Maybe Christie's playing with our emotions and they actually do survive. This whole plot line of them reuniting and falling back in love, and then boom, Gallywix ruins it. So I'm a little distraught, and this is the second heartbreak, because Will Benton dying is the first, and now this. And if you're still not sad, get ready, because it's going to get sadder. So, back to Anduin. Before Anduin sends the letter to Sylvanas requesting this meeting between Forsaken and humans, he has a meeting with some important people. He has several meetings during the book, but this one's very important. So we've got Gen Greymane, Spymaster Shaw, Sky Admiral Rogers, who is the airship naval commander for the Alliance, very anti-Horde, very anti-Forsaken. Velen's there, Turalyon, and Illyria. Now, Illyria and Turalyon weren't in the first half of the book, but this is where they show up. So, Anduin proposes this meeting, everyone's against it except Velen. Illyria actually references, at this point in the story, her reunion with her sisters in that comic we saw last week has actually already happened. So, that meeting is referenced in the book. No details are given, so the comic was still kind of, we knew nothing about the reunion. All we know is that Illyria says it didn't go well. It wasn't a good reunion, and reunions between family members aren't always a good thing. Anduin's a little bit kind of like caught off guard that she had a reunion with Sylvanas, and he's reminded of something Valera says, Valera Sanguinar, who, by the way, we know she's a blood elf rogue. She's actually Anduin's personal spy, which is really cool. Valera Sanguinar served Varian and now serves Anduin. Anduin doesn't even tell the SI-7 about her. She is his standalone single spy. No one else knows about Valera except for Anduin. And Valera says something about not being able to trust everyone around you, or Anduin says something about that, and Valera says, obviously you can trust me. And, some people might think that there's like a little plot line set up there. I don't think Valeera is going to betray Anduin. She's been so loyal to Varian since day one. And Valeera and Anduin just sit in his room quietly talking and drinking wine. And it's like she's had a million chances to assassinate Anduin, and she's totally Team Anduin. Back to the meeting. So, Sky Admiral Rogers hates the Forsaken, what they did to South Shore. Anduin says, what if your family survived the plague? What if they are Forsaken? And she's like, I don't want to meet them. Everyone's against it. But Anduin says, screw you all, I'm king. We're doing it. You're all going to back me on this. So the screening process happens. Anduin, Kalia, and Gen start by screening one particular guy, and I thought this was kind of cool. Anyone who read Tides of War will remember a Forsaken named Frandus Farley. He was a Forsaken general representing Sylvanas for the siege of Theramore, and he defies Garrosh later in the story. He's very anti-Garrosh. He thinks the whole attack was a terrible thing, and he's actually like a decent Forsaken that we see, one of the first decent Forsaken we see in actual novel form, and he actually ends up getting killed in Tides of War because of it. His brother, Frederick Farley, is the innkeeper in Goldshire, and so Anduin calls Frederick Farley to the keep and tells him that his brother was indeed a Forsaken, but that he defied a tyrant. He was a hero, he knew it was wrong, he knew Garrosh was evil, and he died doing what was right. And Anduin says, if you had the chance, would you have wanted to see your brother as he was, undead, but a hero? And Frederick says, after some thinking about it, Frederick says, I would have liked to see, because he was a good man. He was always a good man, and even if he was dead, I would have wanted to see him. Which pisses off Gen. Gen's totally against this. So they start screening more people. And they screen all these different people. You only see a couple screens like in book. Everything else happens off screen. But the other one you see is Philia Fintalis, which is the daughter to Parkwall, the historian I mentioned earlier. And she's 100% for it. She's ready to go. She's really excited, and she kind of breaks down. Kalia's there to comfort her. And Anduin gets this real motherly feeling from Kalia right there. And so Anduin asks Kalia in private, what's going on? Kalia's been having nightmares, and in one of her nightmares we see she's singing to a baby before she's being attacked by an undead. She reveals to Anduin that when Taranis was focused on Arthas, when Arthas was going through his paladin phase, she rebelled and married a lowly footman and got pregnant with this lowly soldier, not a nobleman, someone that her father would not have approved of. Taranis didn't know, but Mom did. And Mom kept it hidden from Taranis, and they went on this countryside tour for a good portion of the year, so Kalia can go through her pregnancy, and the baby was sent off to live with the father away from nobility, and eventually Kalia's mother promised that when Arthas had an heir, she would tell Taranis and try to legitimize the baby so Kalia's name wouldn't be defiled and all that stuff. That doesn't happen. The Scourge attacks. Everything goes south. Kalia tells Anduin that she hid in a ditch from the Scourge for days and eventually made her way to South Shore, where she was reunited with her husband and her child. And this is where the timeline's a little bit scary. Now, I could be wrong, but South Shore was in Lordaeron, and likely came under attack by the Scourge. But did the Blight ever show up? Did the Plague ever show up to South Shore? And I'm not sure it did, because it's up until Cataclysm, it was still standing, and not many fallen places in Lordaeron were ever reclaimed fully by the Alliance. So she says she was in South Shore when the Blight came, and she was separated from her husband and child and whisked away on a horse. No one recognized her, by the way. Time had passed, no one recognized her. Doesn't say how much time had passed. So I'm sitting here kind of curious, is this still during the entire Scourge invasion? Or is this the Forsaken attacking South Shore? I don't think it's the Forsaken attacking South Shore, because we'll get to that in a second, but it's curious that they said Blight. So now I'm wondering, is this the Scourge attacking South Shore? Was it just an invasion that they successfully repelled but they got separated? Or was this the actual attack on South Shore by the Forsaken in Cataclysm? She and several refugees are in Silver Pine Forest, and there's a lot of happy reunions, but she never actually finds her husband and her child. And that's when she understood the Forsaken weren't monsters, and that quote is why I don't think it was during Cataclysm. She understands the Forsaken are not these mindless beasts. They're exactly as she would be, as Anduin would be, if they had suffered the same fate that the people of Lordaeron happened. They were just unfortunate souls in an unfortunate situation, and not all of them were bad. She hopes her family isn't mindless undead, and Anduin actually says, like, you don't know if they're Forsaken. They could be mindless undead, and she has hope to see them one day. She has hope that, all she holds on to is hope. And Anduin remembers a quote from Chi-Ji, the Red Crane, Celestial of Hope, and him and Kalia get it. They connect spiritually right there, and Kalia says for the first time, like, you understand. Someone understands. This next scene is my favorite scene in the entire book. I love the entire book, but this scene, many scenes brought me to tears, but this scene was like, if I could see any scene in Before the Storm in cinematic form, it would be this scene right now. Anduin calls Turalyon in again to talk about the meeting between the Forsaken and the humans. He decides to meet with them in the Church of the Holy Light in Stormwind. It's nighttime, candles are dimmed, church is empty, novices and acolytes are moving about, on different floors, but it's just them in here. And Anduin says, you feel that this meeting is wrong. And Turalyon says, we made that clear. If you've bidden us to come here this hour simply to rehash this argument with you. And he goes, no, not with me. And a voice speaks out from the dark. With me, came a rich, warm, oddly echoing voice. They turned around. Archbishop Alonzus Fowl stood on the blue steps leading up to the altar. Now keep in mind, Alonzus Fowl is probably one of the most important human characters from the Warcraft 2 era. Archbishop of Lordaeron. He is the guy who created the Paladins. This dude is important. And he's standing there undead. Now he says, this is where Fowl is a little bit funny and a little bit cheeky. I'm quite aware that I don't look as you remember me, but I think you'll recognize my voice, and my face is mostly intact, though it lacks the bushy white beard I was so fond of. Greymane and Turalyon are speechless. And then their words come to them, and they are furious. They are so angry. Gen says, you've gone too far, Anduin Wrynn. How dare you bring this thing into the Cathedral of Light? You're chasing this distorted ideal of what peace really is, and now you've brought that here. Alonzus Fowl was my friend. He was Turalyon's friend. We'd accepted that he was gone. He was buried at Fowl's Rest. Why are you doing this to us? Anduin didn't flinch. He'd been expecting this reaction. Greymane then turns his anger on Fowl. He actually thinks Fowl has Anduin under a mind control spell. And this goes to show you how calm Fowl is. Forsaken tend to be very angry individuals because the horrors and atrocities that were done to them affected them mentally. Think of yourself as a regular human. You die to the plague and arisen and become Forsaken. You may retain your mind. You may be normal. But all of those horrible things will turn your mind, and that's why some Forsaken are so evil. Not because they were evil in life, but because what have happened to them when they died. Fowl does not let that get to him. Fowl says, I know why you attack me with these words. You do so because you are afraid. And Anduin goes, oh shit, you just insulted Greymane. Greymane's now pissed. And Fowl says, I say again, you are afraid. Oh, not of me personally. I'm certain you believe you can take me in one of your heartbeats. You may be right at that, but I'd just as soon not find out. No, again, Greymane, you're afraid because you believe that if you acknowledge here, Now, with me, that Forsaken aren't irredeemable monsters. If you show any hint of understanding, or kindness, or compassion, or friendship, then that will mean your son died for nothing. This is where we're reminded of how emotions also affect Worgen. Keep in mind, Gilneans can walk around in human form, or Worgen can walk around in human form, but extreme emotion affects them, and it affects Gen here. He transforms instantly. The black smoke surrounds him. He transforms into a Worgen. Turalyon stops him. No bloodshed in this place. Greymane responds, "This creature doesn't even have blood. He's tied together like a stick puppet with ichor and magic." Fowl says, "I know something about loss, and I know something about you too. You've held fast to that pain and it's served you well. It's enabled you to fight with unbridled ferocity. But like any edged weapon, it can cut both ways." Greymane loses it. He can't change his world. He can't change everything that's happened to him. He says, "I want my son back, but that banshee murdered him. She and her kind," he points a finger, "your kind, nearly destroyed my people." Fowl says, "Yet here you are, many of you who are strong and healthy and alive. Answer me this, old friend, if I had not come alone, if I had brought Liam with me, raised as I was, but still himself as I am, would your answer be different?" And Greymane breaks. He runs out of the cathedral, howling. People might think of Greymane as a bit of a baby, but keep in mind that he is looking in the face of a friend who he has thought has been dead, and this friend is making him question everything that he hates about the Forsaken. Greymane is an angry old man, and he's softened over the years, but as a Worgen, that anger really bubbles up fast, and it was either rip Fowl apart or run, and he runs out. Fowl and Anduin have a little conversation, and they forget Turalyon's there. Turalyon is more shaking angry rather than yelling angry. He threatens to blast Fowl into oblivion. He says, "Whatever priestly powers they have come from the shadows of the light, not the light itself. If there's anything left in you of that good, kindly man I loved so much, you capering piece of carnage, come to me, and I will blast him into merciful oblivion." Turalyon is blinded by fury at this point. And Anduin's a little bit upset. Anduin doesn't say anything, but he's shocked. How can Turalyon not see Fowl for this calm, normal Forsaken when Turalyon himself befriended a dreadlord, a Nathrazim, who had been turned by the light? How could he not see Fowl? Anduin can't say anything. But Fowl is the master of words. So Fowl says here, to Anduin's horror, Fowl closed the distance between himself and spread his arms open wide. Turalyon trembled and his fists clenched, but he did not strike. "Look for the light in me," Fowl instructed. "You will find it, and if you do not, then I do beg of you to strike me down, for I would not wish to exist as a broken corpse the light had abandoned." And Turalyon does it. Turalyon bestows this powerful beam of light upon Fowl, and he's concentrating. He's looking at Fowl with every fiber of his being. He's looking at him through the light. Turalyon's face was hard as stone. It was the unforgiving expression of the righteous doing what they had deemed to be the right thing. But then, as Anduin watched, transfixed by the silent struggle going on between belief and faith, that granite visage softened. Turalyon's eyes widened, and the radiant golden glow that enveloped both the living and the dead caught the glitter of unshed tears. Joy spread across his face, and then as Anduin watched, moved beyond the ability to speak, Turalyon, Paladin of the Silver Hand, High Exarch of the Army of the Light, dropped to his knees. "Your Excellency," he breathed, "forgive me, my old friend. My arrogance blinded me to what was clear all along had I looked within the right eyes." Fowl is struggling with emotion. Forsaken is struggling with emotion here. He says, dear boy, there is nothing to forgive. There was a time when I would have agreed with you. You were the sole living member of the original order, the last of the only sons I would ever have. I am grateful that I am not lost to you. not to death or the void or to your own limitations. In the end, Turalyon supports Anduin. He sees Fowl for the good in what he is. Kalia is there, Anduin is there. They wish Greymane could have saw what happened, but it's a victory. It's a victory for them. Turalyon is now Team Anduin. He sees, he believes in this plan. And this is... In Legion, when Fowl came back, I was a little bit sad because Tyrion dies on the broken shore. And I would have liked to see Tyrion look upon Alonso's Fowl with his own eyes. Tyrion was a pretty liberal human. He was a pretty forgiving human for both sides, so he wouldn't have been so angry. And then we get Turalyon back, and I thought, when I was running around in Argus, I said, man, it would be so cool to see Turalyon and Alonso's Fowl meet. How would they behave? And I thought, oh, he'd hate the undead. And then I thought, no, he's been around for 1,000 years. He's tempered. The light has forged his path. He is more open-minded. He's fought alongside the Horde on Argus. He would accept him. And then seeing this, he's still a human. He's still a paladin of the Silver Hand. And he's blinded. For a split second, he's blinded. And this is one of the most beautiful scenes in this book that I'm pretty sure I held my breath the entire scene as I read it, because it was so right. It was done so perfectly, and I could not have asked for a better reunion, like a throwback to the old Alliance Warcraft 2 paladins, but a new style of paladins, meeting the undead and accepting them for who they are. Let's get to Arathi. Arathi Highlands, this is where the meeting is set up. Now, both sides have set up. The Horde are just on the other side of Thoradin's wall. The Alliance set up in Stromgarde. There's a little sermon held by both Kalia and Fowl and the civilians. By the way, every single member of the Desolate Council is partnered up with a living member of their family or friends. Everyone gets to meet someone. There's not one member of the Forsaken Desolate Council that doesn't actually get paired up with someone. Little sermon held by Kalia and Fowl inside this broken down church in Stromgarde Keep. You know, it's an abandoned keep. Ogres have lived here, thieves have lived here, but it's abandoned. And the humans are a little bit nervous because before them is this Forsaken priest. And remember, they're not used to Forsaken in any way. So Kalia's there to calm them down. Now, no one knows it's Kalia. She's there on her own. And Fowl makes a little bit of joke about, you know, it's a little bit drafty in here, and they kind of laugh a little bit awkwardly because it's an undead making a joke. You know, Fowl's he's a very lighthearted character, but he's serious when he needs to be. And we're gonna jump back a little bit. Kalia's nightmares happen often, and there's one scene where she goes before the Naru in Netherlight Temple, and she asks the Naru, Sara, why does she keep having these nightmares? And Sara says, you know, they're going to stop when you're ready for them to stop. She then says this, and this is key, this sits into Kalia's mind. There are things you must do before that peace will be granted to you. Things that you must understand, that you must integrate into yourself. People who need your help. What one needs in order to heal will always come one's way, but sometimes it is hard to recognize it. Sometimes the most beautiful and important gifts come wrapped in pain and blood. So that sits in Kalia's mind for a while, and she meets with a Forsaken priest after who talks to her about something, and Kalia gets it. Kalia realizes there's hope, and after that, you know, this is before the church scene with Turalyon. Kalia convinces Anduin to let her go to this meeting. She needs to be there. Before this meeting happens, Anduin and Sylvanas meet one-on-one in the middle. No one around, no guards, no weapons. She rides out on her undead horse, he rides out on his living horse, and they meet. Anduin wants her to swear that she will not harm the Alliance, and he gives her a little bit of lip, and she says, I give you my word. As the Dark Lady of the Forsaken and as War Chief of the Horde, no member of the Alliance will come to harm by any member of the Horde today, including me. Does that satisfy you, your majesty? And Anduin has been racked by this one question for a long time. Early on she says, "Do you not trust me to keep my word?" And he says, "You've gone on it back before." To which then she replies with her oath, "I give you my word." And his response is bold. Anduin says, "Did you betray my father?" He drops the question. He drops that question right there. Just the two of them. And there's a lot of internal dialogue going on between Sylvanas and herself. And we actually get a little bit of description of the Broken Shore cinematic with Fulgen. We get Sylvanas' thoughts. And all I'll say is she says, "Varian Rin's destiny was set in stone, little lion. The Legion's numbers would have seen to that whatever choice I made that day." Anduin looks at her, searching for a lie. He found none. Something about him relaxed ever so slightly. He then gives the same oath that she does. "What happens here today benefits both the Horde and the Alliance. I'm glad you have agreed to honor the ceasefire. I hereby swear to you that I will abide by it, and no member of the Horde will come to harm by any Alliance hand this day, including mine." They go their separate ways. The meeting happens. Anduin stays in Stromgarde with Gen and Turalyon. Sylvanas and Nathanos stay on the wall. Fowl and Kalia are on the ground. Forsaken priests are up in the air on bats. Alliance priests are up in the air on griffins. And the human refugees come out, no guards. Human refugees walk out by themselves. Human civilians, sorry. And the Forsaken Desolate Council members come out. Now, Fowl offers one last chance for anyone to turn away. This is your last chance to leave. You may do so now. And at first no one moves, but then several Alliance members, they're standing a couple yards apart, the line of humans and the line of Forsaken. And the Forsaken, most of them are dressed decently. There's actually one member of the Desolate Council. She actually knits a whole bunch of scarves for the Forsaken to wear, so they can cover up their rotting jaws and their gruesome faces. They can look slightly more presentable and not scary. And yet, some of these Alliance members, these humans, are absolutely terrified. And this is where you feel sorry for the Forsaken. And not that the Alliance are mean or cruel, but in their minds, so much horror has gone on in their lives, they can only see the undead in one way. They see those glowing eyes. They see the bones jutting out of the bodies, and they can't get past that. They can't see that the person that was once still there is in fact still there. And so several members of the Alliance are too terrified, and they turn away and leave. One Forsaken cries out. He's sad. He's sad. Don't leave. Other Forsaken members just hang their heads and slowly walk back to the wall. And old Emma feels bad for them. Your heart breaks for these Forsaken. Alonzo's Fowl calls out old Emma. That I told you about her earlier. All of her family died and she had 3 sons. All three sons, Jem, Jack, and Jake, are on the Desolate Council. So old Emma gets called out. She steps forward. And Kalia even says, you can return to the keep if you want. There's no hard feelings. And she goes, "I don't want to disappoint." So Alonzo's Fowl calls out, "Jem, Jack, and Jake." The 3 Forsaken stepped forward from their own line, advancing hesitantly. Emma stared at them as they approached. They all had been so large and fit in life, such strong young men. How confident they had been, how proud to serve Lordaeron. Now they were but skin and bone and limp, clotted hair. It took her a moment to read their expressions. Her sons, once laughing and confident, looked frightened. They are more afraid here, in front of me, than on a battlefield, Emma realized. Emma started to weep, even though she felt her mouth curve into an enormous smile. "My boys," she said. "Oh, my boys." "Mama," Jack said, lurching towards her. "We've missed you so much," Jem said. And Jake simply bowed his head, overcome with the moment. Then all 3 of the Forsaken bent down to embrace their mother. Philia is called forward, and Parqual is called forward. And there's no hesitation. Philia runs up. Papa, it's really you. Philia starts to wander with her father. Philia wants to hold her father, wants to hug her dad. She says, Papa, can I hug you? And he says, I can't. My skin can't handle those bear hugs that I remember so well. She starts to cry. She says, can I hold your hand? And he says, if you want. And they hold hands. They talk about the little teddy bear she once had. He actually brings the teddy bear, who she calls Brownie. Brownie is the name of the teddy bear. And there's a little table set off to the side where Forsaken can bring little gifts for their living family members, and a table for the Stormwind humans to bring gifts for the Forsaken family members. Anduin and Sylvanas will look at these gifts, make sure they're not poisoned or anything, and then hand them out accordingly. So Parqual says, Brownie is off limits until your king says it's safe. And they walk around. They talk. Daughter and father reunited. Mother and sons reunited. There's another character we meet. His friend, Thomas. He reunites with his friend after so many years. Everything is going well. Emma has a little bit of a brief panic spell where she starts to lose her breath. The Forsaken, her sons, Jem, Jack, and Jake, call for help. Kalia comes over. Kalia heals her. Her sons are legitimately concerned, but all is well. Kalia shows up. At this point, Kalia meets Elsie, and Kalia offers her condolences. Elsie really wants to meet Anduin. Elsie actually brings her wedding ring that Will Benton gave her. It's on a chain, and she's wearing it on this day, knowing that although she could not see Will today, this was all worth it. And she really wants to meet Anduin for making this all happen, but Kalia says that's not going to happen today. No leaders approaching. Maybe next time. The next meeting this will happen. And she looks back towards Strom, and she waves, and Anduin waves back. The scene goes back to the wall, and several Forsaken are returning after having been denied and turned away. The Forsaken who actually sewed the scarves for everyone, she's one of the ones who's rebuffed by her family members. I believe it's her mother. And she apologizes to Sylvanas. She says, you were right. This never should have happened. And their betrayal and their rage just delights Sylvanas. She's sitting here going, yes, these Forsaken are angry at the Alliance, but there's still ones in the field that are happy. Sylvanas looks out using her spyglass, and she sees Anduin wave. And then she sees Anduin bow to Elsie. She sees Anduin bow to Velcinda, Governor Prime of the Desolate Council. And she's pissed. Kalia is overjoyed as the reunions go so well, and she thinks Amenethil caused all of this devastation, and Amenethil is going to fix this. Philia is so excited for the second meeting, and she's walking around with her dad, she's walking around with her papa, and she's a child of history. She loves learning about history, and she says, oh, Papa, you should write about Arthas and what happened that day. And then she realizes her mistake, and she covers her mouth, and she says, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. And Parkwell says, no, it's okay. It's something that I thought about, a first-hand account. That doesn't exist. That's not in the history books. Philia says, Papa, you could write it. We could share this with the Alliance. You can let everyone know what really happened. Parkwell says, I don't think a second meeting is going to happen. And Philia is upset. She says, no, I won't accept that. I only just found you again, Papa. I won't lose you a second time. There has to be a better way. And Parkwell says, I think there is. Remember, this guy's a historian. This guy knows his stuff. So he says, I want you to meet someone. So he comes over, goes up to Kalia. He says, Priestess, can I get your blessing? And Kalia says, of course. Parkwell leans in very close and whispers, we need you now. It's time. Be ready. Kalia is caught off guard. What is he talking about? Parkwell starts to walk around, and he talks to Emma and the boys. He talks to the other characters who have successfully met up. And slowly and very casually, They all start to walk back towards Stromgarde, Forsaken and Human, casually walking towards Stromgarde, away from Sylvanas, towards Anduin. Emma and the boys go, multiple Forsaken and Human begin to go. Kalia is reminded of the Naru's words. There is something you have to do. People you need to help. And she understands. She lowers her hood, turns to Elsie and says, I need you. Support me. She's laying down her claim to the throne right here, right now. Kalia gets bold. And this is where things go down. Sylvanas watches as the Forsaken start walking away, and she starts to freak out. Nathana says, don't worry, it could be a fluke. They could just be wandering. She says, let's see if they're really wandering. So she blows the horn 3 times, ordering a retreat. A Forsaken priest who had been flying overhead sees Kalia lower the hood and immediately goes to Sylvanas, tells her Kalia Menethil is alive. Sylvanas looks across and says, Anduin Wrynn has brought a usurper. Now at this point, Kalia is asking Elsie, Velcinda, Governor Prime of the Desolate Council, to support her. And Velcinda, Elsie, wife to Will Benton, says, I can't, Your Majesty. She calls her Your Majesty. I can't betray my queen, even for you. And she calls the retreat. She knows how important this is. She knows there are rules, and she calls for the Forsaken to retreat. Elsie starts running back towards the wall. Anduin is watching this from afar, and he watches as Kalia and Elsie argue. He watches as Elsie turns. He watches as the leader of the Desolate Council turn to run towards the wall, run towards Sylvanas and the Horde as planned, not towards Anduin. She's running back towards the wall when she's shot down. Arrows pierce her. Elsie Benton, Velcinda, Governor Prime of the Desolate Council, falls dead for a final time. Chaos starts to happen in Stromgarde. What is happening? Gen starts to freak out. Turallion is yelling orders. Anduin realizes what is happening. Gen. She's killing them. She's killing them all. Sylvanas Rinrunner had kept her word. Her rangers were not attacking humans. They were attacking Forsaken. Even those returning to her. Even those returning to the wall. Perspective turns back to Sylvanas. Nathanos yells at her, "What are you doing, my queen?" She says, "They're defecting." He says, "No, they're running back towards us. All those Forsaken are running back towards us, and you're killing them anyway." And she says, "I am cutting this out where it stands. The only Forsaken who live are the ones who've already returned to the wall. Those who were on the field, those who obeyed her retreat, those who faithfully ran back towards the Forsaken banner that was now hanging on the wall, are shot down by their own queen, by the Dark Rangers that were protecting them." At this point, the deserters start to run full speed back towards Strom. Anduin races out on a griffin, again screaming at him, but he ignores him. He sees Forsaken dropping like flies. And this is where it is one of the most heartbreaking moments in the story. This is where Christy Golden just rips your heart out. Parkwall and Philia are running as fast as they can. Philia is this 15-year-old girl, and she is waving her arms around her father, acting like she's the parent and he's the child. He is this frail corpse running for his life. But her Dark Rangers are snipers. The arrows miss Philia. Parkwall falls to the ground dead a final time. Jem, Jack, and Jake are running as fast as their long legs can carry them. One of them is holding Emma. She can't run. She's old. So one of them is holding their mother, cradling her like a baby. 3 arrows strike true, and all 3 boys drop dead. Old Emma falls roughly to the ground, rolls in the mud, screaming out the names of her boys. Forsaken are dropping like crazy. Not a single human has fallen. All of the humans who are running back to Strom are not being targeted. Sylvanas is keeping her word. She said Alliance would not be harmed by her hand. Anduin gets to Emma just as Jem, Jake, and Jack are killed, gets off his griffin, puts Emma on the griffin, griffin gets Emma to safety. This little bit of a delay costs Anduin everything. He runs towards Kalia, shielding her with the light. He's trying to get to her as fast as she can. She is running as fast as she can towards Anduin, but that light fades. He watched only a few yards too far away to save Kalia as Sylvanas Windrunner drew back a black arrow, slowly, languidly savoring the moment, and then letting it fly. Violet tendrils of smoke twined around the weapon as it flew unerringly towards its target. Time seemed to slow as Kalia, her hood down and her blonde hair flying, was struck in the center of the back, directly through her heart. She arched and fell forward, hitting the ground hard, arms and legs akimbo, making her last movements clumsy and graceless. Kalia Menethil, heir to the throne of Lordaeron, was dead. Anduin gets to her body, and all of the Dark Rangers and Sylvanas are circling ahead, and he calls out to her. Sylvanas says, "I kept my word. None of your humans died." Kalia wasn't one of his. She was Lordaeron's. Anduin says, "You're gonna let me live." And Sylvanas says, "Why? Why would I do that?" She said, and Anduin says, "If you kill me now, the Alliance will retaliate in full, and they will hold nothing back." And Sylvanas leaves. She leaves Anduin, her and her Dark Rangers leave, and that's it. Anduin brings the body of Kalia back to Stromgarde. Everyone hops on the boat, and they head back to Stormwind. Kalia's body is brought back to Netherlight Temple, and Anduin decides to visit. There, he finds out that Sara, the Naru, told Alonza's Fowl to wait for Anduin before the burial rites were settled for Kalia. And this is the biggest reveal of the book. There will be no more of those battles for her now. Kalia Menethil will be freed from the pains of the living, from the nightmares that once rent her heart. She understood that those on that field were her people, and she accepted that responsibility by giving her life to try to save them. Not human as they were when she was young, but forsaken as they were in that moment. Light and dark, forsaken priest and human priest, together you shall bring her back as the light and she herself would have her be. There's a massive paragraph here where Anduin describes the emotion as the light floods through him, this tsunami of power that radiates through him and how he can't control it. And yet, somehow, Kalia could control it. The light limned in its warm hue, and it chased around the still yet complete intact body of the Queen of Lordaeron, and whirled about the forsaken Archbishop. Anduin felt like it swell like a wave, then crest and break, emptying him, but not depleting him. The cold hand in his squeezed. Anduin gasped as Kalia opened her eyes. They glowed a soft, gentle white, not the eerie yellow of the Forsaken. A smile curved on a face that had no flush of life to it. Kalia was dead, but she was living. She was not forsaken, but she was not alive. She was no mindless undead, but she was not forsaken. She had been raised by a human and a Forsaken, both using the powers of the light, bathed in the radiance of a Naru. Anduin chastises her. They're happy in the started. Fowl is stunned, and Kalia says, "I was bold, and I apologize." And Anduin says, "You do realize you almost started a war." She says, "I know. I was never taught to rule, and in that moment I was wrong." And he goes, "You just followed your heart, but sometimes rulers don't have that luxury." "I am not ready to rule," Kalia said, "but I wish to serve the people of Lordaeron. They are my people, and now I am like them. It feels right. I'll learn, and from the Archbishop I'll learn what it's like to be this, to be undead, yet walk in the light." This part still confuses and amazes me because I saw some comments. This is the main part that was spoiled by the Amazon ending, by the way. Amazon put the whole end of the book up on their website. So if you want to read this whole exciting bit with the meeting and everyone dying, You can find it on Amazon. And a lot of people were saying, Lightforge Forsaken, this is stupid, this goes against the light, this is awful. And I'm sitting here going, how much do we not truly understand about the light? Forsaken and human priests together in the light of Anaru resurrected a corpse into an undead infused with the light. And this is huge. And I'm going to talk about how big this is next week in next week's special episode. But to me, this changes everything. I'm going to go into a lot of detail, but really briefly right now, this changes everything that we know about the light, that we know about the Forsaken, that we know about Sylvanas Windrunner, that we know about Anduin and Alonso's Fall. This changes everything. This is, there's not a lot of moments in these novels that are big grand reveals. There's big plot lines, there's big deaths, there's big events. Tides of War was a horrible, horrible tragedy, and you don't understand Jaina's loss unless you read Tides of War. You don't understand Garrosh's character unless you read his multiple books and you read the war crime story. You get to see Sylvanas and Varisa as sisters during the war crime story. All these little moments have these books have these important little moments, but there's not always a lot of big, grand reveals, because those usually happen in the lore, in-game. Yet here we are with one of the biggest lore drops ever, one of the biggest lore bombs ever. And I don't say that negatively. I say that Kalia Menethil, killed by Sylvanas Windrunner, is brought back by the light. What does this mean? What does this mean for the future of the Forsaken? For the future of the light? For the future of World of Warcraft? What does this mean? I've gone on long enough today, so we come back to this next week. I'm going to finish up with the epilogue. Anduin says she followed her heart, but rulers don't have that luxury, and there's this peace between Anduin and Kalia. The epilogue is a very simple, very quick epilogue. The ship arrives back in Stormwind, and Anduin's already there. Anduin's gotten there from Netherlight Temple, fast travel. And he says, turn this boat around. We're going back. They say, why are we going back? We have something to do. And they sail back to the Arathi Highlands. Most of the people on board the ship get back on the ship. They stay on the ship. They go out into the field, and Anduin Wrynn and the humans of Stormwind who met with the Forsaken that day, collect the bodies of the Forsaken that were killed by Sylvanas. Sylvanas doesn't resurrect them, doesn't bring them back for a second chance or for a third or fourth chance. She leaves them there to rot in the sun. Anduin and the humans collect their bodies and bury them. Emma breaks down one last time over the bodies of Jem, Jack, and Jake as she buries them. Philia is sobbing. She got to meet her father one more time, and now she's burying him. And Emma says, they're gone now, every one of them. I'm all alone. And Philia says, no, you're not. We'll help each other. The end of the book, Gen and Anduin meet. Anduin blames himself for all the deaths. Every single member of the Desolate Council who died because of him. He promised safe passage. And Gen admits he was wrong. He says, I thought Sylvanas would turn on us. I didn't think she'd turn on her own people. Anduin asks Gen this. Answer me this. Would it have been enough for you, Gen, to see your son one more time and pay for that one encounter with your life? Old pain shot through him, and he tightened his jaw. He didn't want to answer, but there was something in the youth's face that would not let the older man refuse. Yes, he said at last. Yes, it would have. Gen admits that he would have met with Liam as an undead. Gen admits that he was wrong. And this is how the book ends. People can change, but some people will never, never desire to do so. Sylvanas Windrunner is one of those. I believe said Anduin Lane Wrynn that Sylvanas Windrunner is well and truly lost. And that is how the book ends. Anduin, the champion for peace. Anduin, who wanted to give Garrosh a voice of justice at his trial, who wants to give everyone a second chance, finally comes to terms that Sylvanas is truly lost. Overall, this story is one of the most emotional stories that Christie Golden has ever brought to World of Warcraft, ever. Tides of War is a hard read. And I think, and this is what pisses me off about people who hate Jaina, they haven't read Tides of War. They don't know what happened. Oh, a bomb dropped in our city, big deal. That's such an understatement. I love Garrosh. Garrosh was one of my favorite characters. But Tides of War, you truly see what happens. Everything in war crimes. These books offer insight into characters that the game does not. And this book will bring you to tears several times. First, with the gnome and goblin couple whose fate is still unknown. Christie Golden, we need to talk. Why would you do that to us? And then Will Benton, and we beat all these little Forsaken. Parquel, Velacinda, Elsie, old Emma and her boys. And that all gets taken away. That all in this... Honestly, when I was reading that whole meeting, it felt like a Game of Thrones episode. I was watching it, and my heart was going, I knew something was happening. And actually, when I read this book, I didn't know any spoilers. I knew nothing about the end. And yet, as this meeting was unfolding, as I was brought to tears with these Forsaken who were meeting up, and I was like, this is too beautiful, this is too perfect. What is going to happen? And I knew that George R. Martin's spirit lurked above. I knew that there was this something was going to go wrong, and it happened. And even as it happened, even as I expected it to happen, I was still horrified and shocked and distraught and wishing it would just not happen. And it was such a good read, because that end, if you're going to spoil anything for yourself this is one of the... I love the Turalyon and fall scene in the church, but this, it goes back and forth between perspectives so fast, like a Game of Thrones episode, like a full motion picture. We see Kalia demand Elsie to pledge for her. We see Anduin's perspective as Valcinda gets murdered. We see Nathanos saying, Nathanos, champion of Sylvanas, her biggest fanboy, says, what the fuck are you doing? And she says, I'm ending this. No one could have seen this happening. And I'm going to save my thoughts on Sylvanas Windrunner for next week, but this morally grey comment from Blizzard, the Horde and Alliance are morally grey. The Broken Shore was morally grey, with the Horde running and Varian dying, but the Horde having valid reason to run. That is morally grey. The Forsaken being killed by Sylvanas at a meeting she allowed, that is not morally grey. That is 100% black. That there is nothing balanced about that in there. And this is why Sylvanas is one of my favorite characters, because even though I knew how calculating and how twisted she was, she talks about in the books about raising humans after humans into undead. She's dark. I was still horrified at what she did at the end. I didn't. And she says early, and I made sure I said this early, she says she would rather talk down a Forsaken, deter them, rather than destroy them. And she utterly destroys the Desolate Council. Both the defectors, fine, they abandoned, you can argue that, fine. But those running back, Elsie says, we must return to our queen, and then 3 arrows to the chest, and she's dead. Shot by her queen's Dark Rangers. I am excited to talk with my guest host next week, who is a huge Sylvanas fan. I'm excited to talk with all my Sylvanas fan friends, because these discussions on the forums, these discussions on Reddit and on Facebook groups about how Sylvanas stands with the Forsaken and she is the champion of the Forsaken, and maybe she's different from the Horde, but she is the Forsaken. Where does that stand now? The future of World of Warcraft is on the edge, ladies and gentlemen, because of this book. Something I would have liked to see from the book was more Jaina, and I didn't talk about Jaina's appearance in the book. She does have a scene. Her and Kalec have a scene. But I was left wanting more. I miss Jaina. I'm a little bit upset with Jaina. Where have you been? What have you been doing, young lady? And I want to know more. I enjoyed the small cameo appearances of Bane, Tyrande, Mafirian, Grandpa Magni, Moira, little baby Dagran. But I wanted more Jaina. I was satisfied with these little appearances of everyone. You know, Hamul being shot down by Sylvanas, Magni wagging and doing a Z snap at Sylvanas. Oh no, you didn't. You know, a lot of Gallywicks. I was satisfied with these. I wanted more Jaina. But maybe this wasn't the story for Jaina. Maybe this wasn't the right place. So I'm gonna hold out. Overall, this book doesn't do the job of setting up Battle for Azeroth's pre-event directly. No Teldrassil, no Battle for Lordaeron. So if you're looking for those answers, you're not going to get those here. But that's okay, because this sets up the long run of Battle for Azeroth. This sets up, how can the Alliance and Horde ever work together and save their planet when they're at war with one another? How can this faction of undead ever be trusted? And suddenly, there's trust issues among the Forsaken with their queen. This opens up so many future possibilities to the World of Warcraft storyline. The light. What does the light want? What does the light do? Why did Sara convince Kalia to go to that battlefield? All these questions. You know, we're starting to see the light in a different way, which is fine. You know, maybe it's not all as good as we thought it to be, but we did see the light do some good in this book. Turalyon used the light for good to see Fowl for who he was. And overall, this book has really, you know, every book leads up to an expansion. Tides of War sets up Mists of Pandaria. War Crimes sets up Warlords of Draenor directly. It's a very direct feed. Before the Storm is a direct feed in that the Azerite plotline is there. That is the connecting tube that is getting us from Before the Storm to the pre-event. But the main heart of the story, Anduin, the Forsaken, and Sylvanas, is entirely independent, and I was so unprepared for that I was surprised. I was expecting Battle for Lordaeron, mention of Kul Tiras, Zandalar, Teldrassil, Battle for Lordaeron, anything, and I was suddenly drawn in to this brand new plotline that has never come up in lore before. Reunion of the Forsaken and the humans. Something so simple, something so beautiful, something so impossible in a game called World of Warcraft. Something that we have never been given the chance to see the Forsaken as non-monsters. And this story beautifully paints that, and we see the monsters in the Alliance side. We see that anger and Gen and Sky Admiral Rogers come out. We see how much they hate. Anduin sees how much they absolutely hate the Forsaken. And then we see the Forsaken's perspective. We see their hearts break as their family members turn away and don't want to meet them. We see them, you know, the Forsaken are the ones who are disappointed, not the living. The Forsaken are the heartbroken ones. And this is... I have so much to say on this, and I've already gone too long enough. Honestly, Tides of War was my favorite book. I love books, World of Warcraft books that cover multiple storylines. Vol'jin book, I like the Vol'jin book, but it was very focused on Vol'jin, as the name implied. Tides of War, the Shattering, war crimes, covered all these plot lines all around different characters, and I love that. And if you love that style of writing with different characters, all these mini storylines through Christie Golden's novels, you're going to love this. But this isolated plot is so snugly fit into the book that it comes as a surprise, and it leaves you feeling different about the game in the future. When I put down Tides of War, when I put down War Crimes, when I put down The Shattering, I was ready for those expansions. I was ready for the Cataclysm, I was ready for Mists, I was ready for Warlords. I am thinking about the future of Battle for Azeroth, beyond Battle for Azeroth. This story changes everything, and I am so excited. This is my new favorite story in the World of Warcraft novel series, and I can't wait for all of you guys to read it. I want to talk with you about it. Bringing this podcast to a close, check out our Discord link in the description of the video. Join the chat. Join the conversation. Let's talk about this book in the spoilers channel in my Discord. Let's just talk about all the beautiful, horrible, heart-wrenching story moments in this book. I want to talk about this. And I've had this book for 2 weeks now, and I haven't been able to talk to anyone, and it's really been bothering me. I have been sitting here thinking, what happened to Safi? What happened to her husband? Why did you kill Will? All these characters, Christie. And at the same time, it is such a delight to read and such a game changer for World of Warcraft that I truly feel no one could have done this but Christie Golden. So thank you, Christie Golden, for all that you did. If you're listening to this now, Christie, I really want you to come back for next week's episode to listen to who our guest host is. Good friend of mine, Forsaken enthusiast. We're going to talk about all the things Forsaken and what this book means for them. Thank you guys so much for listening to this very long-winded, emotional, spoiler-filled episode of Decoded, a Lost Codex podcast, the review for Before the Storm by Christie Golden. Special thanks to Blizzard Entertainment and Del Rey Books for providing an early copy for my review, as well as the 5 books that we just gave away. I have already drawn the names for those giveaways, so congratulations to our 5 winners. Those books will be sent out this week, so Before the Storm is on the way to those who won our contest. Thank you so much for listening, guys, and we'll see you next week. And if you're getting Before the Storm this week, enjoy the read. Enjoy the read. Enjoy the Discord. Let's talk. Holy moly, I'm excited. Shut up and go read the book right now. Okay, guys, we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to stop rambling. This is the end. Take care.